Namaskar friends, and welcome once again. In previous class, we were talking about some of the theoretical propositions that have helped us sharpen our understanding of diaspora, the whole phenomenon, and the diasporic writing. To continue that, we will again talk about some more critics who have contributed significantly to this field of study and have helped us understand the whole phenomenon of diaspora, identity formation, cultural transitioning, and so on and so forth. So, in this particular lecture, I intend to talk about three very important diaspora critics, James Clifford, William Safran, and Steven Vertovec. So, all of us know that James Clifford is a famous historian and anthropologist, and he's also a cultural theorist and has significantly contributed to the understanding of diaspora, especially in the context of globalization, identity, and cultural hybridity. He also challenges the rigid notions of diaspora and emphasizes its fluid, dynamic, and politically complex nature. So, he constructs the essentialist notions of home, identity, and belonging, and he positioned diaspora as a mode of cultural production and political articulation rooted in movement, hybridity, and negotiation rather than in a fixed origin. So, in a way, he takes forward the same debate of identity formation in diaspora, how diaspora is a dynamic space of exchange, interaction, and intersectionalities. His works remain central to understanding global migration, multiculturalism, and transnational identity. And as I said, he critiques the idea of fixed essential identities, arguing that diaspora experiences are characterized by fluidity, hybridity, and the constant negotiation of belonging. So, he treats diaspora as a process, not as a fixed identity. And so, he emphasizes that diasporas are not necessarily oriented toward a single return to a homeland, which distinguishes them from exile. And I would like to quote him, which is very significant as he plays pun on the word root. He says diasporas are best understood in terms of roots rather than roots. So, roots with ROUTS, roots rather than roots. So, this is really very important. You know, he explains the concept of diaspora was used in the study of Jewish and later Greek and Armenian displaced groups. And however, since the 1950s, it has been commonly evoked in reference to African forced migration and is now used to describe a variety of peoples and relocation experiences. So, of course, it cannot be treated as something that is homogeneous when it comes to its study as a discipline. He feels that the term diaspora is a signifier not simply of transnationality and movement, but of political struggles to define the local as distinctive community in historical contexts of displacement. So, he talks about diaspora as a process, not a fixed identity, and he critiques the essentialism, the views that diasporic communities are merely ethnic groups longing for return. Instead, he stresses their hybridity, cultural innovation, and the multiple affiliations they develop over time. So he is against, oversimplification of diaspora, and he further talks about, diaspora and power. He brings attention to how diaspora identities are formed and shaped by power dynamics such as colonial histories, racial structures, and economic inequalities. Not all diasporas have the same experiences or agency, and the term should not be romanticized. So, he is against romanticizing and homogenizing the term called diaspora. So, what he takes as his approach is a comparative and relational approach. We find that he argues in this article that diasporic practices are not merely byproducts of nation states or global capitalism, but also critique and exceed them, offering resources for emergent post colonialisms. The essay examines diasporism in contemporary Black Britain and anti Zionist Judaism, highlighting quests for inclusive community politics and cultural difference. So, terms like border, travel, hybridity, and diaspora are used to describe contact zones of nations, cultures, and religions, with diasporas seen as exemplary communities of the transnational movement. So, diaspora communities mediate the experiences of separation and entanglement, living here while remembering or desiring another place. So, again, he is of the view that these diasporic communities are adding significant dimension to cultural exchanges between the host nation and the home nation, and act as a bridge and should be treated just like that, rather than excluding them as somebody who has just made it to the host country without contributing. So he talks at length about diaspora consciousness as it is negatively and positively constituted. Negatively, he asserts, through discrimination and exclusion. The diasporic communities have been discriminated and excluded based on race and their nationalities, and positively through identifications with world historical, cultural, political forces such as Africa or China. So he finds that the diasporic discourse itself is not a unitary body of knowledge, rather, it is also diverse. He argues that contemporary diasporic experiences can't simply be seen as byproducts of nation states or global capitalism. They have the potential to critique and surpass these structures. So, just treating them as such simple categories will certainly not serve our purpose. He also talks about diaspora's borders, currency of diaspora discourses, the Black Atlantic, and so on. And as I said, he talks about the power dynamics, and he proposes a framework to compare different diasporas like Jewish, African, Armenian, based on shared features like dispersal from an original homeland, collective memory or myth about that homeland, a commitment to maintenance or restoration of the homeland, strong group consciousness, tensions with host societies, a sense of solidarity with other members of the diaspora. However, he also warns that not all groups who migrate are diasporic, and not all diasporas follow this exact pattern. So, he highlights how diasporic cultures create new forms of expression, mixing elements from their origins and their host societies, and this creolization or syncretism is key to understanding contemporary global cultures. So, the central point in his essay is that diaspora communities, as groups living across borders, are not always fully connected to or completely separated from their original homeland or their new host country. Instead, as shown in the Zeniza world example, they often build their own small interconnected networks by focusing on things like shared culture, family ties, trade networks, or by forming connections through religious institutions and important cities. So, he believes that these diasporas provide us a very dynamic space where new forms of expression take place, and creolization and syncretism are certainly key to understanding this global culture. If we compare him to Gilroy's The Black Atlantic, Gilroy explores diaspora through the lens of the transatlantic slave trade, emphasizing the hybridity and cultural production of black communities. Like Clifford, he also challenges nationalist and essentialist views of identity, as we discussed in the previous class. Gilroy introduces the concept of the Black Atlantic, a counterculture of modernity rooted in diasporas. Uh, but if we look at both of them as critics, we find both of them come very close in that they reject fixed singular identities in diaspora. They both emphasize movement, roots, and hybrid cultural forms as the hallmarks of diaspora. Again, if we compare him to Stuart Hall, whom we discussed in the previous class, again we find that they both believe that diaspora is not about returning to a pure origin, but about engaging with multiple cultural narratives, and that way provides an engaging, enchanting world of experience. They both emphasize new ethnicities and the political potential of diasporic identities. So, that way we again find some kind of continuity of preoccupation even in James Clifford. Another very important critique is William Safran, and he is a seminal critic in the sense, he is credited with very important contributions to the study of diaspora literature. He is the one who proposed a typological definition of diaspora based primarily on historical diasporas like Jewish, Armenian, and Greek. And he was born in Germany, spent few years in ghetto, forced labor camp, and concentration camp. So many of his theoretical propositions are informed by his own experiences. He migrated later to US in 1946 and continued in the area of ethnic politics, immigration, diaspora, citizenship, cultural pluralism, and so on. And his model of diaspora remains important as a starting point for understanding diaspora. So, what is important when we talk about William Safran is that he is sort of pioneer of diasporic critical formations, in that he is the one who provides us with a model uh, which can be applied to the understanding and study of diaspora, and in that he identifies some characteristics, 6 characteristics of diaspora. This is also known as Safran's model. And let's see, before we talk about it, let's realize that the central point in his essay is that diaspora communities as groups living across borders are not always fully connected to or completely separated from their original homeland or their new host country. Instead, as shown in the, we find that, so he talks at length about diaspora consciousness as it is negatively and positively constituted. Negatively, he asserts, through discrimination and exclusion, and positively through identification with world historical, cultural, political forces such as Africa or China. He argues that contemporary diasporic experiences. So I'm sorry, we are talking about William Safran, and William Safran's model, as I told you, is central to begin any diasporic inquiry. And in fact, he is the first one who gave us a model, a frame through which we can really identify what we call diaspora. In his famous article, Diasporas in Modern Societies, Myths of Homeland and Return, he defines diaspora as expatriate minority communities whose members share several of the following characteristics. And he talks about these characteristics. They are, first of all, they or their ancestors have been dispersed from a specific original center to two or more peripheral or foreign regions. So, we find that this applies to the Indian population or the Jewish population or any diaspora for that matter, who have dispersed from their so called original nation states and have dispersed to the other parts of the world. The second characteristic feature is that they retain a collective memory, vision, or myth about their original homeland, its physical location, history, and achievements. The third characteristic feature of diaspora is the people, the diasporic community, they believe that they are not and perhaps cannot be fully accepted by their host society, and therefore feel partly alienated and insulated from it. And this provides for this experience or this feeling of permanent exile or rootlessness. And this also is detrimental, they are mixing with the local people or local culture. The fourth characteristic feature that he underlines in his model is they regard their ancestral homeland as their true ideal home and as the place to which they or their descendants would or should eventually return when conditions are appropriate. So, one of the most important features, according to Safran, of diaspora is that the people always long to go back to their original homeland. The next characteristic trait that he talks about in his model is that they believe that they should collectively be committed to the maintenance or restoration of their original homeland and to its safety and prosperity. And the last is they continue to relate personally or vicariously to that homeland in one way or another, and their ethno communal consciousness and solidarity are importantly defined by the existence of such a relationship. So, though this model of diaspora was later critically examined and found to be too rigid or essentialist by many of his contemporaries, which they found a little limiting because they believed that diaspora cannot be really accommodated in this frame alone, rather, it is much more than that, and so there is a need to liberate it from this limiting frame. because they find it overly focused on victimhood and trauma, and mostly centered around the Jewish diaspora as a model. Well, friends, during our discussions also, we have realized that the classical diaspora, or the colonial diaspora of India, they were certainly different, because they had different push and pull factors compared to modern diaspora or contemporary diaspora or post colonial diaspora. So, nonetheless, we find that this proposition by Safran is very, very important, in that it raises questions about how to differentiate between various diaspora communities, such as those based on geography, ethnicity, or political context. And it also addresses how diaspora consciousness develops over time and the factors that contribute to its maintenance. So, it poses questions about whether connections to the homeland diminish or strengthen as the diaspora ages, and how nostalgia and myths shape identity. So, his works, other works also contributed significantly while discussing the political dimension of diaspora, transnational influence, and the emotional and symbolic ties of diasporas across generation. And to me, he remains one of the foundational critics of diaspora, who has been able to provide us framework to begin with, and that has of course helped his other contemporary cultural critics like James Clifford, Stuart Hall, and Robin Cohen, um, to critique it and to advance over it, because they found it too rigid, too essentialist, and too idealized, and they found it limiting when it comes to the discussion of new diaspora with all its different dimensions. But nonetheless, he remains foundational and central to understanding of diaspora. Another very important critique is Steven Vertovec, an anthropologist known for his work on superdiversity and transnationalism, diaspora, and ethnic and racial studies. His research interests include globalization and transnational social formations, international migration, ethnic diasporas, and context of urban diversity. So, Vartovik looks at diaspora, and these are some of his seminal texts. So, we find that he played a pivotal role in expanding and refining the study of diaspora, especially in the light of globalization and digital communication and increased mobility. So, in his famous article, Three Meanings of Diaspora, he proposed a more inclusive and flexible framework, arguing that diaspora can be understood in three interrelated ways. So, first, he looks at diaspora as a social form, because he finds it involving a network of dispersed but connected communities who maintain ties across borders. So, diasporas provide a very unique kind of experience for all the people who have left their own country and have moved to another country, and they enter into some kind of networking and maintain some kind of connection with each other, although they are dispersed to different places. And secondly, he looks at diaspora as a type of consciousness. It's a way of thinking and feeling characterized by a dual or multiple sense of belonging, because a diasporic subject, as we have seen earlier also, uh, we have found that they are caught between the promise of the new land and the desire for the old land, and as a result they have developed dual sense or multiple senses of belonging. um, while they long for their homeland, they still try to settle down in their host land. So they don't belong to either of them, but then they belong to both of them or to many of them. So the second is diaspora is a type of consciousness. He looks at diaspora as consciousness. Third, he looks at diaspora as a mode of cultural production, because he finds that diasporas create and sustain hybrid cultures influencing literature, media, religion, and art. And this model, in fact, broadened the concept of diaspora beyond rigid definitions and allowed for cultural hybridity, transnational practices, and identity multiplicity. So, gradually, we find that there was a basic formation of diaspora, identifying and assigning certain identified roles and characteristic features, and then there was a move on from there to understand the complexities of diaspora through different lenses. So we find that Vertovec uh, has contributed significantly to expand our understanding of the term diaspora, which he does not treat as fixed rigid category. And so he asks for better understanding and multiplicity of approaches to look at it, and that is why he talks about this three pronged model. He further asserts that diasporas are not fixed by trauma or return ideologies alone, because there can be many other purposes for migrating, and there can be multiple experiences that might not fit these definitions. So he says that it is shaped by ongoing interactions, technological advancements, and local global negotiations as well. So we cannot really look at it as something fixed or rigid. So Vertovec also helped bridge diaspora and transnationalism by showing how diasporic communities maintain multi standard social, economic, and cultural linkages between their countries of origin and settlement. Friends, if you recall our earliest classes, we were talking about how the diasporic community always engages in a multiple meaningful you know uh, interaction with both the host and the home country, and they act as cultural ambassadors. So they establish this kind of, we talked about it, how the diasporic community acts as soft power, how it acts as diplomatic ambassadors of their country in the host country. So the same thing is being reiterated by Vertovec, who says that diasporic communities maintain multi-standard social, economic, and cultural linkages between their countries of origin and settlement. And when we talk about his concept of super diversity, which was introduced in 2007, and as of today is the all time most cited article in ethnic and racial studies, uh, this concept has been instrumental in expanding our understanding of how migration driven diversification extends beyond ethnicity to include factors such as legal status, economic conditions, and linguistic practices. So, friends, if we look at it, this will certainly give us different critical lenses to look at the diasporic experience, rather than oversimplifying it and looking at it just as a process of migration and longing for return. So, the term super diversity has reshaped how we understand migration driven transformations, the evolving nature of diversity, and the ways in which societies organize and respond to the difference. Steven Vertovec's contributions continue to inspire new research and shape contemporary understanding of migration, diaspora, and transnationalism, making his intellectual influence both retrospective, reflecting on the foundational work he has established, and prospective as future scholars build upon his insights, as Yamamura uh, observes. And we find that in his essay, Three Meanings of Diaspora, he looks at diaspora as a social form, as I said, as a type of consciousness, and as a mode of cultural production. And he critiques the essential models and calls for a study that is context specific, flexible, and so he provides a lens to examine identity, belonging, and politics in the age of globalization. And you know, this is how he takes our understanding to the next level. And his observations and his theoretical propositions have a huge implication for how we understand diaspora, as not just about ethnicity or homeland, but about global complex entanglements. So this further expands our horizons concerning diaspora and diasporic phenomenon, and certainly provides us frameworks that are needed to peel the superficial layers of diasporic experience and gets to its richness and complexity. So these are the references, dear friends, and thank you very much for your company. We continue this discussion in the next class as we talk about another two very important critiques of diaspora. So I'll continue in the next class. Thank you very much.